that the idea is to have a discussion looking into the future. What are the possibilities for us to get out better, so to speak, in the future? That's the main idea. That's the theme for the whole conference. And the plan for this coming hours is as follows. I will start with this PowerPoint here. You see on top that there's a phone number. It's not for me if you want to offer me a beer tonight or so. You can do that anyhow. But that's for questions from the audience. Please SMS your questions there. And that's to save some running and also to see if we can bundle some of the questions so we don't need to repeat the same things which might happen. And I will have some help here from Eva Forsgren who will help me to sort and those. And please don't call the number and start talking. Send an SMS. Otherwise we get a bit messed up here. I can say though that I'm very happy to see so many of you here because you always, as I'm now standing here, you're always a bit nervous for events like this, and it feels much better when I have support from so many of you at the same time. So this is the way we are going, and we are starting then with the panelists, and they will get the opportunity one by one to make a short introductory statement on what they think about this topic, and if they want to give us some more information about themselves throughout the short introduction which I give you all. And then we'll move on to those three main questions. So the questions that you might send over an SMS, please try to figure out a way so they fit somehow to the main questions for the day. Other questions, there might be a tendency that we'll put aside, so to speak. We try to keep it focused on those issues. And they are pretty wide, so with a little bit of fantasy, I guess you will be able to fit quite a lot into your questions that will hit those issues. So the first speaker to join me up here on the stage is Etienne Bruno. Please, would you come up, Etienne? And Etienne, he is manager for Kari Beekeeping Center in the Walloon region in Belgium, and works with losses of bees and so on, and support bee life in their work. But you're also involved in the Copa Cochega lobbying organization in Brussels, which usually work with agriculture issues, but there's also a honey working group, which Etienne is president for. Please, very welcome. Give him an applause so we get going here.
Okay, thank you very much for this introduction. So, as you tell me, I am a president of a working group in a farming association at the European level, and so my role is very difficult because it's, we speak a lot of problem between the beekeeper and the farmer. The first thing that I have to tell you, and you know this, all the beekeepers are farmers too. So it's not a conflict between the farmers. It's just a conception of the farming. And what's the topics? This topic is very important for me. It's a key. It's a key debate. For me, it's very, very important. All the themes that we have there, we are discussing of all these points during all the meetings that we have with the beekeeper. And so the solution that we can find together or the direction in which we have to go, for me, it's very important. And I hope a lot from this debate, and all your questions will be great. My topics and what I mean, we are working with nature. And with nature, we must produce very high level of quality for the product. This is the key. And together, I am sure that you will arrive some solution. Thank you.
Thank you. From here, we will move on. But before that, since I'm a bit nervous, as I said, that meant also that I forgot that all of you, of course, you don't know me. So you wonder, who's that guy standing up there chatting around? I'm a Swedish beekeeper. I'm part of the board of the professional beekeepers in Sweden. And usually, so to speak, on my full-time work, I'm a forester. And then I travel forth and back to Brussels and do a lot of information tasks, analyzing issues in Brussels on how that could influence Swedish or Scandinavian forestry. So that's where you see the connection. Here's a lot about EU and Belgium and so on. And I had my Swinglish, so they asked me, could you please try to moderate this? So now you know who I am. Okay? Sorry for that. Thank you. Let's move on then to speaker number 2. Linda, please. Linda Birkedal, she is a member of the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation. And also, if I'm correct, you also work as an environmental strategist in Lund, in the city of Lund, which is the next neighbor city, you could say, for those that are not Swedes here in southern Sweden. And you will join us also. And please give your small introduction.
Yes, and Naturskyddsföreningen, the SSNC that I represent, we are 224,000 members, and we work with several different topics. Agriculture, food security is one of them that we will touch upon today, but also safe use of chemicals in society, with biodiversity, and that's things that I would like to focus on, because I see that this is a very complex issue actually when it comes to biological systems, where different organisms are dependent on each other, and we are dependent on them, because this food production that we gain from the pollinators is really, really crucial. And that shows in our work in the SSNC, because we're not only active in Sweden, but also in a global context in Asia, Africa, South America, where we support many local NGOs. So today I would like to that we find the keys to address the complexity of this issue, because I think only then we will be able to make things right, and also that this is the key to find the win-win situations where everybody will gain from the solution.
Okay, thank you. And the next speaker is Noah Simondelso, please. Noah is a Spanish veterinary specialized on bees and bee research. Also, and if I understand correct, you have an expertise in health issues and toxicology issues with bees. Please, Noah, be welcome. Whichever one.
Yeah, hello. Hello, good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation. So I come here today in representation of BeeLife, that is the European Beekeeping Coordination. It's an association at European level working on all the environmental threats of honeybees. And why do we work on the environmental threats of honeybees? Well, as you well know, bees are environmental animals. And specifically, the honeybees are environmental food-producing animals. And we consider that what the field shows us, the increasing number of bee disorders, honeybee disorders, the bee losses, colony bee losses, the negative trends of wild pollinators, together with the studies that are done at European level, and maybe you have heard the EpiLobby study. It was checking, trying to get knowledge about the losses, the level of colony losses at European level, and also they observed that there was no link at all between the colony losses and the pathogens and the parasites that could be observed. So actually, you beekeepers are doing a fantastic job in keeping your bees healthy, and anyway, they are lost. So that means that the problem comes elsewhere. So we consider that the problem comes from the environment. And since the problem is mainly observed in regions where there is intensive agriculture, so we specifically question the goodness for the environment and for the bees and for us all of the agricultural model. So we think that in this agricultural model, the farmers are pushed into the circle that keeps the soil dead. And then because there is no life in the soil, there is much more dependence on all inputs like pesticides, like fertilizers, water, and also much more dependence on machinery. So actually, we need to question this agricultural model. We also work a lot on pesticides, because we cannot understand how is it possible that pesticides that are not well evaluated get into the market. And we cannot understand that actually the voices from the field, from you, the beekeepers, who are the observers, do not get to the political level saying that there is a problem. yeah, so that's so we are asking actually the public authorities to ask the beekeepers. Wherever there is a problem, the beekeeper will say that there is a problem because their bees, his bees or her bees, will be having problems. So. So our philosophy, let's say, is that same as the honeybees, beekeepers need to work as a superorganism, and they need to work together in the same direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noah. And the next speaker is Dr. Julian Little from Bayer. He's a manager of communication and government affairs, and he's also been heavily involved, I understand, in Bayer Bee Care Center. You're coming behind me. Welcome, Julian.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the invitation. Fantastic to see so many people here this afternoon. I work for Bayer, makes pesticides, makes a lot of other things as well, including you will, I'm sure, used products for control of varroa and things like that. I think it's a really interesting topic, and I think you've chosen some very interesting questions here, Mr. Chairman. One thing I would say, when it comes to pesticides, Bayer first started looking at the impact of pesticides on bees around 1942. We have photographs of the first bee research place in Germany in 1942. I'm surprised that they were doing so much work on bee health even in those days, especially in those days. But that site still exists, and bee research still goes on there. I think this whole subject around the health of bees is one that really does need a lot of study, because you know, if you look at absolute bee numbers, it's very clear that the honeybee isn't doing so badly. But if you look at the health of those honeybees, clearly there are some problems. And we do need to understand the complexity of it. I was interested in already in hearing some of the solutions that have been proposed. I think this afternoon will be a good opportunity to explore some of those. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Julian. And the next speaker is Mrs. Jytte Guteland. Jytte is a member of parliament in Brussels for the Social Democrats. And as you can hear clearly from her name, she's Swedish, isn't that so? You're welcome, Jytte. Could someone help me with some glasses for water for our panel? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm honored to be here, and I'm glad to see so many of you here. And I thought it was fantastic to go through this building and see the children who are here. And I think that gives lots of hope when we have school class here learning and also getting the involvement that I believe that you all have for the bees and our future. My name is Jytte Guteland, and I'm a Swedish member of the European Parliament. I'm in the ENVI committee, so I work with environmental issues on a daily basis. And in my work, I have lots to do with the climate change. And I think because I'm also a rapporteur for ETS system. But I think I can connect my involvement to also the future, the environmental future that we need to create together. And when it was the election, and I have not regretted that, but I said that I would like to be the bees and the children's representative in the European Parliament. And I like to stick myself to that promise, because I believe that if we do well for the bees and for the children, then we will have a good future. So I think that actually is a big promise. I'm in my work today, I see that it's clear that we need to shift from a very chemical intensive farming to a more natural farming that uses the nature's own system to improve farming for the future. Of course, as a politician, I see the importance of feeding more people in the environment. But we need to do that in a way that we don't harm the environment. And I'm very afraid when I see what's happening at the moment, where we actually see that more and more chemicals are used. And I believe that the legislation that we have in Europe today is not enough. It is too narrow, and we see that chemicals used actually harm. The bees are like both, it's important by itself, but it's also a symbol of what is happening to our ecosystem. So I hope to discuss that further here today. Of course, as a politician, I have prepared. I wanted to speak a long time here in the beginning, but Martin told me that please behave and speak really short in the presentation. So I have lots of more to say, but I will keep that to the question in the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jutta. I have to say I'm always happy when I get a politician to listen to me. That doesn't happen so often, so I'm very happy for that. Thank you, Jutta. I was just having one short question more for clearance. Jutta, did I hear correct? You said you were a rapporteur for something, and I didn't miss.
For the emission trading system. It's
Okay.
about the climate, and I'm working at the moment in my daily life a lot with that rapporteur.
Thanks. And what I wanted to explain to you, if those of you that knows what the rapporteur is, hand up. Yeah, that was almost all of you.
So sorry.
No, that's the one who hangs on to the pen and writes, you could say more or less, to make it easy, huh? Yeah. So she writes some suggestions on the topic she mentioned then on climate change and the dealing with buying and selling carbon units, so to speak. That's what it's about, huh? Okay, thanks a lot again, Jutta. Next speaker would be Walter Heifecker, whom you already met earlier this morning during the opening ceremony, but I don't know if it was said then that, of course, on top of having all those official roles, you're also a beekeeper. Yes, and we shouldn't forget that, of course. You're welcome also, Walter. Give him an applause too.
Yeah, thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this panel. A lot of correct things were already said, including that, of course, beekeepers are also farmers, and this is especially true for professional beekeepers. But the kind of farming that we do is unusual because what we are working with is not a closed production system like fattening pigs or raising chickens, but our production system is probably the most open, maybe with the exception of hunters that produce venison that also have very little control over their production environment. So because we are operating such an open production system, there are a lot of external factors that impact the health of our bees, the quality and the marketability of our bee products. And this is why we have to be involved in debates like this. I think most of us agree that the status quo is unsustainable, and that's why we feel we have to be part of the pressure for change, but we also have to be part of finding alternative solutions. And I can keep my remarks relatively short as well, because what we're doing with farmers, for example, in the area of certified bee-friendly production methods, I'm going to have the opportunity to give a talk at 4:30 this afternoon, so this was a little advertising spot here. Thanks.
Good, thank you. And final but not last is Lasse Helander from Swedish Beekeepers. Lasse is a member of the board of the Swedish Beekeepers, and he's an ecological beekeeper and also a lobbyist, you could say, in a way, Lasse. Huh? Welcome, Lasse.
Thank you very much, and have a nice day. Yes, I've been an organic farmer and beekeeper since 1968, and so I know it's possible to do farming without chemicals. We have a little thing that somebody calls weed, but I say also that weed has flowers too. And you don't have to tell the bees about that. They know where they are. So it's very interesting. I made a little time out in my beekeeping, and I came back, and I realized that it's a lot of problems nowadays with beekeeping. Sicknesses, diseases, there's a lot of things. Varroa is something maybe you heard of, but that's man-made. The trouble is man-made. It's not the nature who created Varroa and spread it all over the world. We made it, we spread it. And we have to back off here and look in a future, what do we do in mistakes, and how do we do not to do all the mistakes? That's very important for me. Well, I represent the Swedish Beekeeping Association. We have over 11,500 beekeepers, and the different amount of hives, but they are all interested to have healthy bees. That's the main task for them, to keep a healthy bee stock. So I'll be back.
Thank you. I'm happy to hear you don't leave immediately. That's good.
I speak too much too.
Okay, then we have finalized the small introduction. So now you out here, you know who those guys are. I just want to give you a small reminder. You remember the number up on top there? You could use it, huh? SMS a question. Now when we're getting into the more discussion on the different topics, please use the possibility and send an SMS to Eva, who's sitting down here. Then the question that I thought we should spend some time around to start out with is the issue about that, of course, as everyone is aware, to give a small background, that there's always an ongoing, during the last 5-10 years, discussion on biodiversity. And biodiversity is also, as you're probably well aware, very important for all the pollinators, including our honeybees. There's been a fairly large change over time in the landscape when it comes to agricultural landscape especially. But still very large number of the crops, they are dependent on the bees for the pollination. So farmers and beekeepers, we actually depend on each other. At the same time now and then, of course, then the farmers have some problems, not only with weeds, as Lasse is mentioning here, but also with some pests of different types. And they feel that they need to use the pesticides to be able to clear that problem. Some of those pesticides might be problematic for the bees, but still, farmers and beekeepers, we are dependent on each other. So I was thinking that we should try to now spend some minutes around the issue, how can we improve the landscape for the bees? How can we find a win-win situation for beekeepers and farmers, instead of throwing pancakes or whatever over the border, so to speak? How can we find other possibilities to find win-win solutions to move forward? That's where I want to hear your points. Anyone who volunteers to start, or should I pick a volunteer? Etienne, please.
It's a very big problem, yes, the win-win.
Yeah.
And I think it's possible, I'm sure. But we have to change a lot of things. It's just the spirit, and not only the farming techniques. I think until now, a farmer, when you take the definition of farmer, it's a person who produces quality of an alimentary product with the nature. With the nature, and not against the nature. This is one key parameter. And I'm sure that actually, you tell it, it's possible to produce with nature and not against nature. And all the challenge today is to change this spirit. And it's not everybody is concerned. The beekeeper, sure, the farmers, sure, the industry too, because they have to put in the hand of the farmers tools who respect completely nature. And one other person was concerned too, it's the consumer. Because the consumer, they ask every time perfect product. What does it mean? I prefer tasty product, a quality product without pesticide inside. It's better for us. It's better for everybody. It's better for the health. So I think it's all the system that we have to change. And alone it's impossible. The beekeeper will not solve this problem. The bees are just there to tell to everybody, we have a very big problem. Our immune system is disappearing. We get all the pathology. we have to change something, and it's everybody together. We can change something. It's not only one person, not one element. It's all a chain that we have to change, and it's not tomorrow that we have to begin to start now to change, and it will take perhaps 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. The topic is everything must change, and we are just like a Marshall Plan. We have to planify all these elements and to see where we will go. We will work with nature to produce nature and to produce quality products. This is the topic for me.
Thank you. Walter?
I absolutely agree, but one perspective that I would like to add is that in January I was at the largest agricultural fair in Germany, Green Week, at the press conference of the president of the German Farmers Union. And he had to explain that in the last 2 years, farmers' income has dropped by 50%. I was also at the press conference of the dairy farmers who are in huge trouble. At their press conference were not just dairy farmers from Europe, but also a dairy farmer from Africa that was explaining what our agricultural policy is doing to them. So I think the solutions and the change that we need to push for, we're not only doing in the interest of the bees, but also in the interest of the farmers, because this system is unsustainable for farmers. As we speak, farmers are giving up in Europe. We have a structural change in the farming community. And what we've been working on, it's another advertising spot, going to talk about that this afternoon, is we've actually been working with the farmers to create a production system that is both more economical for them and better for the bees.
Okay, Linda first, and then Jutta after that. Linda, please.
Yes, then I will give some examples of farmers here from Skåne. The first is a man just about 30 kilometers away from here. He's not a beekeeper, he's a farmer, but he's also a hunter. He is, I think, a real hero. He is seeing that he could help the bees. He could get better hunting and more production in his fields by the one and same solution. He is working, when you're a hunter, I don't know if you're hunters, but if you're a hunter, the game, the wild animals that you're hunting, they need somewhere to take shelter. And when the crops are harvested, the fields are often very barren and nowhere to hide. Then he has saved some valuable space that he could grow his crop on for shelter for these wild animals. And when he makes this shelter, he uses plants that are also attractive to pollinators and bees. And this way he gets a triple win. And I think that's a very good example, and he is also a very good ambassador for this solution. He's out talking to a lot of people about this. Another example is here in Skåne we have some really, really big farmers who have been owning their land for generations. They have a very long time perspective. And I think when we're looking at the current use of pesticides in combination with other environmental stress that is pressed upon the pollinators, we have to have this really long perspective when we look at farming, at the harvest we actually get. To maximize the harvest we get today at the cost of the harvest we get in 10 years or 20 years, that is not sustainable. And that he understands because of this long time perspective. And then I say that the solution he has found to this is actually diversity. To use diversity to be prepared to tackle these different kinds of stress that is affecting the pollinators. If we look at a global scale, about 40% of the bees and the butterflies, the most important pollinators. If you also look at wild plants, they are threatened of extinction, and that is not a good number. That is scaring, I think. And if you then prepare for this, you should go for diversity, I think, and allow a lot of different crops, but also a lot of wildflowers room in the agricultural landscape. And this variation, it should be in time and it should be in space. I mean that by changing crops between the years, you're protected increase your protection against disease, and by using many different species of crops and also wildflowers in the landscape, you will provide for a diversity of pollinators, because we see that although the honeybee
Linda,
is
could you
very
please round
okay.
off? You
I
will get
round it
more
up.
opportunities, don't worry.
The honeybee is very important, but the wild pollinators are also important for the production in our fields.
Thank you, Linda. Now, before we're moving on, I have the rest of the panel just a second, but I was thinking I would like to have this more like a ping pong game. A bit quicker balls, and then we get a smash from the public coming in. So I will ask Eva if you could just throw in a few questions here, which you could also consider, those of you who are on the speaking list now. Could you please throw in a few questions, Eva? Do you have a mic, or can I borrow one here for? So we get all you here sitting here on board, so to speak.
So, are current allowed EU chemicals for farming a problem for the bees within the European Union? And would you, can you mention top 2 activities that you would like for retailers to do for European bees? Did you understand the question? Oh.
There's a certain echo. Try again.
Okay, can you hear me? Are current allowed chemicals within the European Union for farming a problem for the bees? And can you list top 2 activities that you would like retailers to do for the bees?
Okay. Now, next on the list was Jutta. Go ahead, please.
I was afraid that you were going to say that we should have a ping pong game here, because it's so short. But I think it's a very important question from the floor. That is actually one of the things that I believe the EU should focus on, to try to see that the common chemical legislation is not enough. We have the caution principle and the substitution principle, and that's important, that we are very restrictive and see if there is risk of harm, we need to have a substitute for that chemical. But in the reality, we see lots of chemicals used that's actually harming the bees. And for one example is this week we were in, you get dizzy, in Strasbourg, and we had an opportunity to write a petition, sign a petition from Polynice. I hosted this in the parliament, and they demand that neonicotinoids should be more regulated. And that is because we see that the common situation where we try to protect only the soil that we think affect the bees is not enough, because we have other land areas around that where we use neonicotinoids, and that is actually harming the bees and the whole ecosystem. And therefore this December, and I will finish that there, the ping pong, in December we are going to reform the legislation regarding the neonicotinoids, and we need a broader legislation, a better legislation that will take in concern that the ecosystem is actually a total system, so that we cannot say that this pesticide is going to be used in this particular land area and it will not affect the other farmers or the other parts of the farming. We need to think broader than that and better than that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jutta. Julian, please. Yes, you first.
Thank you. You started off by saying that farmers have a role to play in everything that we do here, in terms of so much of our land is farmed, and therefore it's really getting the farming right that's important. I think in all of this there's an issue here in that the primary role of farmers is normally to grow food and biomaterials, whether that's food for us to eat or for animals to eat or whatever. I think there's been some really good legislation around making sure that as they do that, they make sure that they're not having a detrimental impact on the environment and are doing their best to improve biodiversity. But we do have to make a decision here. At some point in Europe, we do have to make a decision as to what do we want our farmers to do. You can ask farmers to stop growing food. You can ask them to do that. Or you can ask them to dramatically reduce the amount of food that we produce in Europe. But there are consequences of that we become much more reliant on importing food from elsewhere. Because like it or not, if you start to reduce the intensity of agriculture, by definition, you're not going to produce as much food and you're going to have to get it from somewhere. So, when we're making very clear decisions as to ban this or ban that or ban the other, you have to look at the impact. And I'll just give you one example of that. To the east of here, we have Finland, who, like many countries in Europe, supported the ban on the use of neonicotinoids in oilseed rape. The result? Finnish farmers stopped growing oilseed rape. As a result, actually beekeepers very concerned about not having a good supply of nectar and pollen at a very critical part of the calendar. There was derogations as a result of that process, and the Finnish Beekeepers Association supported that. You have to look at what the impact is of your decisions whenever you make a decision in all of these things. And I would argue that, yes, we do have to look really, really carefully at what is causing the problem with bee health. But let's not just ban the nearest chemical, because that's the easiest thing to do.
Okay, thank you. Before we move on, I have quite a few here now on the list. We also have other topics. So now I have the feeling, I don't know if you agree in the audience, we are now moving away from ping pong to tennis, more like dunk on dirt, dunk,